When a missing person case is filed, the ensuing investigation usually takes a pretty predictable path. Searches are organized in the areas where they were known to frequent. CCTV footage is reviewed in an attempt to ascertain their last movements, and their last social media accounts, bank accounts, and cell phone records are monitored for any activity. If all of these efforts prove fruitless, appeals are made to the members of the public who may have seen or heard something at the time of the disappearance, and any incoming leads are then followed up on. But some missing person cases are a little more complex, as certain pieces of information only come to light later, and depending on what's revealed, it either assists or hampers the investigation. Number 5. Bill Smolinski mysteriously vanished from Connecticut in August of 2004, and to this day, no one knows what has become of him. Bill's family has expressed their frustration at the fact that his case has seen very little media attention, while other, more well-known cases are being talked about on the news, social media platforms, and radio stations, while they waited in vain for the police to take Bill's case seriously, despite being told on multiple occasions that he wouldn't simply decide to vanish into thin air. Bill is described by those who were close to him as tough on the outside but soft on the inside. He was never one to get into trouble with the law, and after graduating from high school, he held down a few odd jobs working on cars, mowing lawns, and even trying his hand at towing vehicles. While working as a bus driver, he met a woman called Madeline Gleason. Bill was 16 years younger than Madison, and his family didn't particularly care for her, since they felt that she wasn't as committed to the relationship as Bill was. But Bill seemed to enjoy spending time with her, and so they let the couple be. Madeline would later reveal that she never saw their relationship as something that would last long term, and considered it to be more of a fling than a serious commitment to one another. On the 21st of August of that year, Bill and Madeline left Connecticut and traveled to West Palm Beach in Florida to visit Madeline's son, Thomas. But the visit would take an unexpected turn when the couple got into a heated argument. Bill and his family had been suspicious that Madeline was having an affair with a married man by the name of Chris Sorensen, the owner of the school bus company that they both worked for. At some point during the weekend, Bill noticed that Madeline was talking to someone on the phone after she had closed herself in the bathroom, and it would turn out that the person on the other end of the line was Sorensen. Naturally, Bill became infuriated, and an argument ensued while they were spending time at the beach. Bill, wanting to look at Madeline's phone, attempted to take it from her, but she started yelling for someone to call the police, and ultimately they cut their visit short and drove back to Connecticut that same evening. 2 days later, something truly bizarre happened. Bill had traveled to Madeline's home in an effort to talk about the troubles that they had been having. He resorted to getting a ladder, which he used to climb into the house's second-story window, likely because Madeline refused to answer the door, but this has not been confirmed. Bill pleaded his case, telling Madeline that he still loved her and wanted to continue their relationship, but Madeline didn't feel the same way, and she sent Bill on his way, leaving him feeling frustrated and betrayed. He then placed 3 calls to Sorensen's phone, saying nothing during the first 2 calls, but leaving a message the 3rd time, in which he warned Sorensen to watch his back, though no direct threats were made. That afternoon, Bill stopped in at a Burger King restaurant for some food at around 3 p.m., after which he paid a visit to his neighbor, asking them to take care of his dog for a few days since he wanted to get away for a while. He stated that he would be going north. But that would be the last time that anyone saw or spoke to Bill. He was reported as missing, but the ensuing investigation caused Bill's family no small amount of frustration, since the police didn't think the case was of a high priority, with one detective telling them that Bill was probably in Europe somewhere drinking a beer. Bill's mother stated that there were a few telltale signs that something had happened to Bill, such as the fact that his car was parked in a different spot than usual. She added that his wallet and keys had been tucked in beneath one of the car's seats, something that he was not in the habit of doing, but her concerns went unheeded. Nonetheless, search parties were organized, and the wooded areas near Bill's house were thoroughly searched by as many as 300 people, along with sniffer dogs and private detectives, but no sign of Bill was found. Bill's family printed missing person flyers, which they put up in the area, but no further leads came in until 2006, when two men who were at a Dunkin' Donuts first noticed the flyers, and one of the men stated that he had information on the case. He told his friend that Bill's life had been ended by Madeline's son, Sean, who claimed that Bill had assaulted Madeline while they were in her apartment. He stated that after the deed was done, Sean called one of his friends, Jason Lee, who helped him dispose of the body at a construction site that's now been completed. This lead could not be followed though, since Sean passed away in the months following Bill's disappearance. The case grew colder with every passing year, but in 2006, the FBI stepped in, and Bill's family found new hope that he would finally be found. Another 2 years passed without any progress, but that's when one of Sean's friends, Chad Hansen, who was with him when he passed away, came forward to confess that he had helped dispose of Bill's body. Many further searches were carried out, but none provided any further clues, and it was ultimately decided that Hansen had lied about his involvement. He would be sentenced to a 4.5-year prison sentence for making a false statement to police officers. Madeline has told members of the media that she's certain that her son didn't end Bill's life, and added that she didn't know how this rumor started, since he would have told her if he'd committed such a heinous crime. Bill remains missing, but his disappearance also had a positive impact on the way that missing person cases are handled by the police. A law known as Billy's Law, or Help Find the Missing Act, was passed, and it would see a further $10 million allocated to training police officers in their approach to these cases. A $60,000 reward has been offered to anyone with information on Bill's case. Anyone who has a lead in the case can contact Michelle Sulo at 203-789-5707 or call the tip line at 203-530-9135. Number 4. In some missing person cases, one gets the feeling that someone connected to the case knows something that they've not revealed to anyone, least of all investigators, and this often brings the investigation to a halt until they decide to come forward with what they know. This may be because they feel that they'll be held responsible for the person's disappearance in some way, or that there will be unexpected consequences that could impact their life in a negative way. This can cause a lot of frustration among those who are involved in the investigation, since the family, friends, and searchers in the case are always looking for even the smallest of leads, which is no small task to undertake. What can be even more frustrating is when evidence is found, but it then leads to a dead-end street, and the case seemingly needs to be started from scratch, despite the fact that someone has information that could end the case once and for all. This seems to be the case in the ongoing investigation into the disappearance of Christy Russo, as evidence has been found and collected on 2 separate occasions in 2 separate locations. Still, it failed to provide any tangible leads in tracking her down. In October of 2021, 32-year-old Christy Russo was living in Boone, Texas with her 2 children, and at the time she was not in a relationship. She had run into a bit of trouble, however, as she'd been held at the Jasper County Jail for a short while, though it isn't known what charges were filed against her. She was released from prison on the 20th of October, after which she was given rides by multiple people as she traveled between Boone and Silsbee. It's known that she went to the Garden Inn and Suites Motel in Silsbee, but again it isn't known what she was doing there or if she met up with anyone while there. The following day, Christy got a ride from her aunt, who dropped her off in the 1800 block of County Road 777 in Boone, where one of her friends lived. This was the last time that any of her family members saw her, and she still remains missing today. Investigators would later find surveillance footage of Christy from a Dollar Tree store located in Evadale, just outside of Boone, where she could be seen spending time with the few of her friends who lived in the area. A witness would later tell police that they saw Christy being dropped off close to her friend's house on Gumsloth Road on the 25th of October, but it isn't clear who had been driving the car. This was the last known sighting of Christy, and it would be another 2 months before any leads in her case were found. On the 18th of December, a motorist who was driving along County Road 721 off of Highway 96 spotted something strange by the side of the road, and they decided to investigate. They found that 2 large trash bags had been left next to the road, and inside they found women's clothing, along with a few personal possessions. Strangely, they noted that the bags were soaking wet, and they immediately notified the police. Investigators contacted Christie's family, who then confirmed that the clothing belonged to the missing woman, and they began to fear that something untoward had happened. With no further leads to follow, the police decided to search the house where Christie was last known to be staying, and they later released a statement in which they confirmed that one person, Colby Tatum, had been arrested at the house, but added that it had nothing to do with Christie's disappearance. They would later reveal that he was arrested on charges of driving with an invalid license, as well as theft, and charges related to illegal substances. But the search wasn't conducted in vain, since it resulted in a second search being carried out at a property next to the friend's house, though investigators have not revealed how the 2 properties are linked to Christie's case. What is known is that DNA was collected from the house's walls, floors, and ceiling, after sections of plywood were removed from these areas, and these have been sent to the DPS Crime Lab, which is based in Houston, Texas, for processing. While the second search was being carried out, a nearby pond was drained and searched, but no sign of Christie was found. Some media outlets reported seeing search crews using an excavator and shovels during the search, leading many people to believe that there was little hope that Christie would be found alive. It was revealed, though, that a large amount of evidence had been collected from the house where the first search was carried out, and that these items had been sent to the DPS Crime Lab where they're being processed. Christie's family is hopeful that these pieces of evidence will finally bring a close to her case, and investigators have vowed to keep following up on any leads they receive until Christie is found, whatever the final outcome may be. There is a strong suspicion that Christie was the victim of foul play on the day that she went missing, and an $11,900 reward is being offered to anyone who has information that leads to her current whereabouts, or that helps identify whoever was responsible for her disappearance. Christie would be 33 years old today, and she's described as having brown hair and brown eyes. She's around 5 foot 3 inches tall and weighs between 150 and 160 pounds. She can also be identified by a large tattoo of a set of angel wings that's located on her back, and it should be noted that when she went missing, her nose was pierced. At the time of her mysterious disappearance, Christie was wearing dark shorts with a white shirt and white socks, but she was not wearing shoes. If you have any information on Christie's location, or know anything that can help bring closure to her case, you're urged to contact the Jasper County Sheriff's Office at 409-384-5417. Number 3. Mother's Day is supposed to be a joyous occasion in which we celebrate the relationships that we have with our mothers. But for many people, it's a grim annual reminder of a tragedy that's occurred. For Jen Newberry, Mother's Day will forever be remembered as the last time that she spoke to 34-year-old tow truck driver Patrick Chapman, who was her ex-husband and the father of her son, before he went missing from St. Charles, Missouri, where they had both been living. Jen and Patrick decided to get a divorce in 2011 after being married for 6 years, but they stayed in contact, and Jess describes their relationship as friendly, since they still had regular contact with each other, and there were seemingly no hard feelings after the divorce was completed. On the 10th of May, 2020, Patrick sent a text message to Jen, wishing her a happy Mother's Day, and he then told her that some money had gone missing from his bank account, and that he needed to log into his account to figure out what had happened. He asked if he could use their son's Chromebook, since he was unable to access his account via his cell phone, and he would travel to Jen's house later to ask for the device once more, but it would lead to a misunderstanding that led him to being asked to leave. Jen was under the mistaken impression that Patrick was accusing their son of accessing his bank account and taking the money, but she has since admitted that she overreacted in the moment. She stated that Patrick was confused by her reaction, but he left when she asked him to. This would be the last time that Jen had any contact with Patrick, and she's not seen or heard from him since that day. She would later learn that Patrick had contacted the family of a woman he dated in the past to ask if he could stay with them for a while, which was not out of character, since he'd stayed in their shed for short periods in the past. They agreed to let Patrick stay over, and he arrived at their house in Mill Spring at around 10 p.m. that same evening, after which he went to the shed to sleep. But a short while later, Patrick knocked on the house's door to ask if he could have a firearm to keep in the shed with him. When asked what he needed the weapon for, he stated that there were as many as 9 people who were discharging firearms on the next door property, and he wanted to keep it for protection. But the owner of the house could find no one firing a weapon, so he denied Patrick's request and told him that it would be better to just get some sleep. But by 4 a.m. the next morning, they realized that Patrick nor his car, a 1995 Burgundy Escort station wagon, were at the house anymore, and he had seemingly left of his own accord without telling anyone what his plans were. This is the last time that anyone saw Patrick, and his disappearance has still not been solved. He wasn't reported as missing immediately, since he was known to stay over at different friends' houses or to go on camping trips without much planning, even sleeping in his car on some occasions, and it was assumed that this is what he was doing. But eventually, days turned into weeks, and still no one had heard a word from Patrick. And on the 30th of May, the family with whom he had stayed the night before his disappearance decided to file a missing person case with the Wayne County Sheriff's Office. A search was carried out in the areas surrounding the family's house where he was last seen, and soon searchers found Patrick's car where it had been left abandoned in the Mark Twain National Forest, about 2 miles away from the family's house. The car had been left across a four-wheeler path, and it was noted that it had sustained a large amount of damage to one of the bumpers, and that all 4 of the tires were flat. Inside the car, searchers found Patrick's medicine, bank card, and ID, but it was noted that his cell phone and car keys were missing. If Patrick had run into some kind of trouble, it would have been impossible for him to phone anyone for help, since there was no reception in that rural area. It also meant that investigators couldn't track his phone, and fears were beginning to mount that Patrick had been in an accident, or that he had met with foul play while he was driving through the woods. What struck investigators as strange was the fact that Patrick's vehicle had been completely wiped clean, and they were unable to find any fingerprints on it, including Patrick's. Furthermore, his wallet had no cash inside, though it isn't known if he was carrying any when he left his friend's house. Further searches were organized in the areas around Patrick's car, but despite cadaver dogs and volunteers combing the area using a grid search technique for months on end, no sign of Patrick was found. The search was extended to areas where he was known to sleep in his car, where he frequently went camping, but again they proved to be in vain, as no further leads could be uncovered. Many more searches have been carried out by Patrick's family and friends, who have navigated the rugged terrain surrounding his vehicle, sometimes drudging through the snow while looking for him, but they had no success in locating him. Patrick's family believes that he met with foul play since he wouldn't abandon his son. They also pointed to the fact that he left his medication in his car and that he had money from a stimulus check in his account, but this had not been touched. Investigators don't agree, and they're treating this case as nothing more than a disappearance until it can be proven that something more nefarious has taken place. Patrick is described as having brown hair and brown eyes. He's 5'6", and at the time of his disappearance weighed about 160 pounds. He also has a tattoo of a cross on one of his shoulder blades and the image of the sun, or possibly a saw blade, on his back in the middle of his shoulder, and has several scars on his back and hip area from a surgical procedure that he underwent in the past. If you know where Patrick is or what led to his disappearance, you're asked to get in touch with the Wayne County Sheriff's Department at 573-224-3219. A $3,000 reward is being offered by Patrick's family for any useful information that'll progress the investigation into his disappearance. Patrick's NamUs case number is MP70614. Number 2. Many people who knew 28-year-old Kenneth Edward Tank in Fargo, Minnesota in 1971 believed that he was rather stuck up and unsociable. But the truth, according to his wife, Darlene Johnson, is that he was a shy person who mostly just kept to himself. Tank grew up in Rugby, North Dakota during the 1940s and 50s. Back then, it was a town that only had around 3,000 residents, and not much else is known about his life, other than the fact that he disappeared on the 12th of December, 1971, under very unusual and mysterious circumstances. At the time of his disappearance, Tank and Darlene had 2 children named Deanna and Douglas, and he was working as an insurance adjuster, but he'd grown tired of the job since he felt sorry for those people who deserved to have their insurance claims paid out, but were constantly being denied, which gives us further insight into his personality. He also wasn't wholly unsocial, as he was known to stop at Ralph's Corner Bar from time to time to visit with his brother-in-law, who was a regular at the establishment, and this would be one of the last places where he was ever seen. When his wife was interviewed by the police after Tank vanished, they asked whether the couple had any issues with their marriage, and she replied that everything had been exceptionally good, as they hadn't even had an argument in several years, and she didn't believe his disappearance had anything to do with the state of their marriage. Thanks to Darlene's statement, investigators pretty much immediately ruled out the possibility that Tank had decided to leave of his own accord to start a new life somewhere else, since there would be no reason for him to do so, and they didn't think that he would willingly disappear while leaving his loving wife to wonder what had become of him. What they did know is that Tank had stopped in at Ralph's Corner Bar on the 2nd of December at around 10 p.m. It's believed that he had got a taxi to get there and had spent some time with his brother-in-law, as he was known to do on occasion. Witnesses would report that they saw Tank leaving the bar that same evening, and it was assumed that he would be traveling straight home from there, but he never arrived and hasn't been seen since. Investigators would also learn that Tank had grown so jaded with his job as an insurance adjuster that he'd made the decision to quit, since he felt that many of the customers who submitted insurance claims were being unfairly turned away, and he didn't feel comfortable in his role anymore. Early in the investigation, investigators could find no reason why Tank would just go missing, since they couldn't find anyone who he had bad blood with, or who would have a motive to do him any harm. They did learn that on one occasion, a disgruntled customer at the company that he was working for produced a blade while dealing with Tank, but luckily he never used it to attack him. It isn't known whether this incident was connected to his disappearance, but the police thought it was very unlikely. Taxi drivers who were working that night were rounded up and interviewed, but none of them recognized Tank as one of their fares, and investigators began to speculate what may have happened to him after he stepped out of Ralph's bar. They considered the possibility that Tank had simply decided to walk home, but weather conditions that night were very harsh, with temperatures falling to a mere 17 degrees and wind speeds reaching up to 20 miles per hour. They came to the conclusion that if Tank had indeed decided to walk home, it would be unlikely that he would have survived the trip, as he probably would have succumbed to exposure to the elements, since he would have had to have traversed the prairie plains where conditions would have been even more treacherous. It then came to light that Tank had a few issues with the local motorbike gang that had ties to the world of organized crime. The gang had submitted an insurance claim, but Tank had no choice other than to deny the payout, which understandably irritated members of the gang. But this was quickly ruled out as a motive for his disappearance, since the issue had seemingly been resolved. Investigators were satisfied with his family's explanation for why he quit his job, but they were surprised when it was revealed that he may have had additional reasons for leaving, since he felt that his family's safety was being threatened. One family member, who asked that their name not be made public, was interviewed by Forum News Service, during which time he made the startling revelation that Tank and his family were worried that he may have come to harm at the hands of an anonymous caller. A few weeks before Tank disappeared, he and his family started receiving phone calls at home in which they were being threatened, though it hasn't been revealed exactly what those threats may have been. The calls got progressively worse as time went by, and at one point, Tank felt that it may be necessary for him and his family to move away to a different state, since they weren't sure whether the caller would follow through with their threats. Ominously, as soon as Tank went missing, the threatening phone calls stopped, leading many people to believe that the anonymous caller was either responsible for his disappearance or that they knew what happened to him. Searches were conducted in the areas that Tank was known to frequent, but no sign of him was ever found. The case eventually grew cold, and it became ever more likely that he wouldn't be found alive, if at all. As the years passed by, many people contacted the police to report that they had spotted Tank, one other person claiming that they had seen him walking out of a local hotel, but all of these tips were followed up on without success, and Tank's disappearance remained an unsolved mystery. In 1977, Darlene was shocked to learn that a person's remains had been discovered in a hayfield located in North Dakota, and rumors began to circulate that Tank had finally been found. But when the remains were identified, they were determined to belong to someone else. This would happen again 20 years later in 1997, when a set of remains was found in an unnamed location close to a river. But again, they weren't Tank's, and the investigation into his disappearance remained open. Tank's case remains unsolved to this day, and no further signs of him were ever found. No new leads have come in, and the chances of him eventually being found grow ever more unlikely with every year that passes. Tank is described as having brown hair and hazel eyes. At the time, he stood around 6 feet tall and weighed approximately 185 pounds. He would currently be 79 years old. If you have any information on this case, you're asked to contact the Fargo Police Department at 701-235-4493. Number 1. Craig Lyles, a 33-year-old man from Waterford, Michigan, is described as a very social person who enjoyed spending time at his church, the Friendship Missionary Baptist Church in Pontiac, where he served as the choir director. Craig's family says that on occasion he had a hard time growing up in Pontiac, Michigan, since he was a homosexual and he sometimes felt like he wasn't accepted by the surrounding community. But those who were close to him thought of him as a loving and caring person. One friend told investigators that Craig was always willing to help out, and stated that when she bought a food truck business, he would always stop to buy something to show his support for someone who had just started a new opportunity. Before Craig suddenly disappeared on the 21st of January, 2021, he was living in an apartment complex called River's Edge, along with 34-year-old Michael Taylor Butler, with whom he'd been in a relationship for the preceding 2 years. He could often be seen at a local gym where he worked out and was known to have ties to the township's theater community, and his family stated that they were very close and always kept in contact with each other. Not much is known about Craig's movements on the day that he disappeared, but it's been confirmed that he spent some time browsing Facebook, and he sent a few texts to several people on the 21st of January. By the following evening, Craig's family began to grow concerned, as they hadn't heard from him all day, and when they contacted Michael, he simply told them that he had no idea where Craig may be and that he hadn't seen him, despite being the last person to see him before he vanished. While interviewing Michael, investigators realized that he had an outstanding warrant in another case, and he was taken into custody. He would ultimately end up spending some time in prison for the crimes that he had committed, but refused to cooperate with the investigation into Craig's disappearance, which investigators and Craig's family found strange and somewhat suspicious. For reasons unknown, Craig's family was unable to enter the couple's apartment in the days immediately after he had gone missing, which they found very frustrating, since clues to his whereabouts may have been found inside, and time was of the essence. They were finally able to get into the apartment on the 26th of January, 5 days after Craig had disappeared, and what they found inside caused them even further concerns for his safety, as things didn't look quite right. Investigators shared their concerns, stating that inside the apartment didn't look like a place that was being shared by 2 people, since virtually none of Craig's personal possessions were present. They did, however, find his cell phone and glasses, but this caused his family even more worry, since they knew that these were 2 items that he would never have left the apartment without, and the situation started to look grim. A friend of Craig's stated that the apartment looked as though Craig never lived there. He was known to own several pairs of suits and church shoes, but these were gone, and even his shower curtain had been removed, as if he had moved out of the apartment some time ago, which was of course not the case. What caused him the greatest concern, though, was the discovery of brown and red spots on the apartment's floor, since they gave the impression that Craig may have been harmed inside the apartment, and then removed by persons unknown. They found Craig's behavior to be highly suspicious at this point, and their concerns only grew when they learned that he'd been using Craig's car since the day of his disappearance, which is strange since it might have contained clues as to what may have happened to him, or where he had been before he disappeared. While no solid leads came in, Craig's family took to the streets of Waterford and Pontiac, where they handed out flyers in hopes that they would jog someone's memory, who saw Craig that night, but they had no success and no one came forward with information. While this was ongoing, his family also organized searches of both of these areas, and this time they found something near the apartment complex where Craig lived that caused them even more concern for his safety. In a dumpster located next to the River's Edge apartment complex, they stumbled across a pair of boots that seemingly contained biological material. They were uncertain whether the boots belonged to Craig, but reported it to the police, and the boots were collected to be sent for analysis, which is still pending. Following this grim discovery, investigators organized more searches in the areas surrounding the apartment complex with the help of canine officers and their sniffer dogs. But they were unable to uncover any further clues, as no sign of Craig was found. Craig's mother has stated that she's certain someone in the community knows something about her son's disappearance, and she's made an appeal to the public for anyone with information to come forward, stating it's time for the people to talk, tell, and show up. Craig's family has openly admitted that they suspect Michael has something to do with Craig's disappearance, but since he's refusing to talk to investigators about the case, there's no proof that he was involved in any way. The Waterford Township Police Department has stated that they're following every single lead that comes in, and they're hopeful that one of these will prove to be useful in the future, but for now, Craig's disappearance remains unsolved. The family has now offered a $10,000 reward to anyone who comes forward with information leading to Craig's whereabouts, or to the person or people responsible for his mysterious disappearance. This reward was increased by another $2,500 when Crime Stoppers announced that they would be offering a reward of their own. Craig is described as having black hair and brown eyes, and he stands between 5'4" and 5'6" inches tall. When he went missing, he weighed between 170 and 190 pounds, and had a trim build since he enjoyed going to the gym often. Unfortunately, it isn't known what Craig was wearing at the time of his disappearance, since all of his clothing had been removed from the apartment where he was living, and so his family couldn't figure out which items of clothing were missing from his closet. Anyone who has seen Craig or has any information on what happened to him is asked to contact Detective Sergeant Chet Bartle of the Waterford Township Police Department at 248-618-6041. If you'd like to remain anonymous, you can submit a tip on the Waterford Police tip line at 248-674-0351. You can also contact Crime Stoppers of Michigan at 1-800-773-2587. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.